I've been a night shift nurse at a veterans hospital for about 3 years. My post is in the basement unit, which is generally calm and quiet, just the way I like it. It's perfect for someone like me who prefers the solitude and slow pace of the late hours just before the morning hustle starts. This one night, however, broke the calm in a way I never expected. There I was around 12:30 a.m., taking a break at the nurse's station, binge watching some TV show when I needed to step out to use the restroom. Everything seemed normal until I finished up and went to wash my hands. As I stared into the mirror, checking if the night's exhaustion had etched its mark on my face yet, an eerie sliding noise above caught my attention. One of the ceiling tiles had moved, exposing the dark void above. Now, I'm no hero, but curiosity got the best of me. I hid behind the wall that splits the sinks from the stalls, heart hammering in my chest, waiting to see what would happen next. Out of nowhere, in the ominous silence that followed, a pair of legs descended from the ceiling opening. When I thought it was my cue to bolt, I didn't move fast enough. The guy dropped down from the ceiling, a pair of wound care scissors in his hand. I sprinted for the door, but he managed to grab my scrubs. We both crashed to the floor, me screaming my lungs out, the kind of scream that wakes up an entire floor of sleeping patients. My coworkers rushed over, probably thinking they'd entered a real-life horror scene, and managed to pull us apart. Thank God. I ended up with a scratch on my cheek, and the image of him holding wound care scissors burned into my mind. Security swarmed in while my male colleagues restrained him. Turns out, he was a new psych patient who had somehow managed a great escape from the upper floors. His family had just admitted him to the ER, waiting for a transfer to psych. How he ended up in the restroom ceiling is beyond me. But after that ordeal, my supervisor and I agreed it was time for a change. I would no longer work night shifts. I'm on the morning shift now, in a different unit altogether, with a painful new perspective. Nothing has ever made me understand genuine fear quite like that night. I was a new certified nursing assistant, or CNA, at the local hospital and worked the night shift. I was excited to have the job that I'd worked so hard for and would volunteer for any task no one else wanted. I mainly did the crap jobs so that I would impress the staff and get to do more medical-related tasks or assist the nurses with their skilled duties. My enthusiasm and teamwork didn't go unnoticed, and soon I was one of the few CNAs allowed to work in the ICU. That night, I was in the ICU, and we only had a few patients, all either heavily sedated or in a coma, so this made it a pretty quiet night on the unit. An older man passed away a couple hours into my shift. We'll call him Mr. Drummond. After the family left, I cleaned, dressed, bagged, and escorted his body to the morgue. The rest of the night was calm. Except, throughout the night, we all mentioned an eerie feeling in the air. I felt as if someone was watching me. I even had goosebumps. At around 3:30, all the call lights above the patient's doors started to flash, but there was no sound. Then, as fast as it started, it stopped. The ICU staff was all sitting at the nurse's station. One nurse made a statement about the lights being creepy, and we all tried to laugh it off. Then another said, It must have been Mr. Drummond saying goodbye, or maybe hello. As soon as those words left her lips, the sound of a singular patient call light filled the air. Most of us jumped, and we all began to look around at the occupied rooms to see who was calling. At that time, it didn't click in our minds that there was no way any of the patients that night could have used a call light. But it was so late that sometimes you don't think about the details, like patients being in comas. That's when I turned and looked in the opposite direction from everyone else, towards Mr. Drummond's empty room. A light was blinking at the top of the door, and inside the room, another light glowed solidly on. At that moment, the unit secretary called out the room number that was flashing on her screen, and everyone froze, slowly turning to face the empty room once occupied by Mr. Drummond. "No way," one nurse said. And at that moment, the call light stopped, and the light in the former patient's room went out. We all sat there for a few minutes, waiting for something more to happen, but thankfully, it didn't. We worked quietly for the rest of the night, occasionally looking at the empty room with expectant fear, but all remained quiet. Not even those of us awake and alive spoke much, especially not about what we just witnessed. But we did go everywhere in pairs. That night was just the beginning of the scariest job I have ever had.
I was working the graveyard shift for an ambulance service in a mid-sized town. It was around 1 a.m. on a relatively slow night when we got a call, a routine one of an intoxicated person, which isn't unusual for that time. The location was a typical hotspot for such calls, often involving intoxications, overdoses, and street violence, so the cops came along too. When we arrived, we yelled our usual EMS as we headed towards the door. The place was a fairly large 2-story house, around 2,500 square feet. The main door was wide open, but the screen was shut, probably to keep out the bugs. The police cleared the way before us and signaled us to follow. Walking into that house, something immediately felt off. It wasn't the typical danger vibes you get after being on the job a while. It was something else. Maybe because the place looked so new, or rather, so empty. The living room had nothing but a plain black couch with a young woman on it, claiming she had been sleeping. That was it. No chairs, no TV, no signs of life. Just the couch and her. The dining room wasn't any different. Just a lone table. No chairs, no plates, nothing. This wasn't a cause for concern, but it sure set an unsettling atmosphere to start out with. We initially thought the girl was the one we were called for, but she seemed sober. Her brother came downstairs and seemed fine too, but it was obvious they were hiding something. Again, it was one of those sixth sense things you get after working on the job for a while. The cops decided to search the house, and we waited as they cleared each area. Just as we were about to head upstairs, I heard a crash from the kitchen. Being the last in line, I turned and flashed my light towards the noise. What I saw nearly gave me a heart attack. There was another young woman crouched on the kitchen counter, all sweaty, with wide eyes and a creepy smile, looking like she came straight out of a horror movie. The best way to describe her is she sorta looked like that creature Golem from Lord of the Rings. I saw an open cabinet above the countertop, probably 5 feet or so off the ground. It was large enough for the small girl to have hidden in. We locked eyes for a second before I noticed the steak knife in her hand. Panic mode kicked in. I threw our heavy med bag at her, which thankfully knocked her over and trapped the knife. I ran past her faster than I thought possible. She calmed down after the others joined me, but not for long. She alternated between an apologetic woman who just seemed exhausted and what seemed to be another entity entirely. For bouts of a few minutes at a time, She would get this huge, shit-eating grin on her face and laugh, mocking our attempts to help her, telling us what she had planned to do to us. That didn't stop as we drove her to the hospital. In the back of the ambulance, she pointed at me and said, "I was gonna put it right there," indicating my chest, and just laughing before falling back on the stretcher. Then, as she was wheeled into the hospital, she leaned up and whispered in the most creepy voice, "See you soon, hero. I haven't slept right since." Thanks for watching, and please subscribe.